the theme, as expressed either by you or by me during one of those very late walks, was the idea of a kind of fiction that seeks a reconciliation of the mundane and the miraculous.
Yes, there are three great fantasy themes. There's the reconciliation of the mundane and fairy. There's the quest for the cure for the world's pain. And there's the education of the king, or queen, or magistrate, or person.
And I just remember talking to you about the idea of reconciliation and then finding that theme in books that I loved, books like Little Big by John Crowley, and having that as a sort of interesting place to hold on to when I was writing my own fiction. And I don't really feel like I've ever quite gone there. I tend to be much more in the writing about change or death.
Yeah.
One of them.
But I mean, Stardust.
Okay, Stardust. Well, yeah, Stardust.
Yeah, Stardust.
Okay, so I've done it once.
Kind of the Graveyard Book, kind of, sort of. That's the education motif as much as that motif. Because a lot of important fantasies chop and change those three things, I'd say.
I mean, for me, the idea of fantasy and the thing that gets me, I think, most excited about fantasy is the idea of being able to make a metaphor concrete.
Yeah.
Make a metaphor real and suddenly be able to do something like Neverwhere, where I was talking to somebody the other day and they said that Neverwhere changed them in that they were unable to walk past homeless people and pretend they didn't exist after reading Neverwhere because of the idea of people becoming invisible. And I'm like, yeah, that's the metaphor, making it real. And they're like, okay, because after that, I had to make these people real. I had to look at them. I had to talk to them.
Yeah.
I'd give them money, but mostly I'd say hello. And it became a real thing. And I'm like, yeah, that's one of the things that fantasy can do.
Yeah, and there is a dark side to that, which is you can actually lose the person in the myth. I mean, in Peter Ackroyd's book about London, he talks about that woman who used to hang out in New Oxford Street and says, the spirit of St. Giles's Rookery lives. And you go, nah, a whole load of us give her money when we come out of selling books in Forbidden Planet.
There's absolutely, although I do love the way that people in London have become strangely mythic over the years. There was Stanley, whatever his name was, who used to be the no-sex...
no protein.
Yes, the less lust through less protein man. And
he was a sandwich man. And he walked around with a sandwich board.
He had his sandwich board. He would occasionally stand and harangue, and you would stand there and listen to him as he would explain to us his thoughts on lust and protein. And sitting. There was less lust through less protein and less sitting. And he walked around, and occasionally you'd just see him on the tube or on the bus carrying his sandwich board. And now he feels faintly legendary. His time came, his time went.
But I mean, Soho, Fitzrovia, that whole area is full of this stuff, and always has been. And it's partly because it's an interface, because stuff happens at the margins. And because fantasy is at the margins of the real, it can do stuff that realism can't.
I'm never quite sure what the boundary is on fantasy. I mean, I love on the one hand, I I think it's so marvelous the British Library has a fantasy exhibition. That brings me absolute joy. And on the other hand, I look at fantasy, and for me, I go, well, where does fantasy start? Does it start when you invent a place? Does it start when you bend the rules? But if you're creating people who haven't existed and you're putting them in places that don't exist, even if it's a little English village that doesn't exist, or a street that doesn't exist, where is your fantasy happening?
But it works when it's somehow specific. And whether it's specific because you put real people as real as you can make them in things that they never did and that never happened, or just make your imaginary person so real in your head that they feel like real. You know, that it's a matter of inhabiting those margins, and making the reader inhabit those margins.
I think for me, the time that I've sort of come closest to really blurring the lines on what kind of book you're reading was probably Ocean at the End of the Lane, where it's definitely not autobiography, it's not memoir, but it is.
Yeah.
It's not fantasy, but it is. It kind of has a children's book hidden inside it. It's like if you read enough of it, suddenly there's this magical children's book that will open up for you and close again for you inside that book.
But it also has adult pain.